recording, and let's begin. So, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to anyone that's coming in from the East Coast. I hope you had a great lunch. I'd like to welcome everyone to the next installment of our Forum Infotech webinar series. Today, we're going to be focusing on cyber liability. Today, we have a distinguished panel of experts, but before we get started with introductions, I just want to cover a little housekeeping. All of you are muted throughout the entirety of this webinar, but this is a town hall format. So essentially, any questions that you have, please put them down in our Q&A section at the bottom. Now, if you accidentally put them into the chat room, don't worry, I'll be checking out the chat for questions as well. But it's best if you put them in the Q&A section, because we're going to answer those questions hopefully in real time as they come in. So don't hesitate to fire questions at us as we get started. Other than that, I'd like to hand the webinar over to the incomparable and wonderful Nicole Kinney from Forum Infotech. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us this morning for our conversation about cyber liability. Are you covered? You know, we focus a lot on cyber avoidance, but we don't really have a lot of conversations around what happens if I do experience a breach. So that's why we wanted to bring you this information this morning so that you're all clear, because it's a curiosity of mine too. What happens after I've been attacked? What's the information that I need to obtain? Obviously we're going to cover some preventative maintenance. We're going to share some cautionary tales, a few stories with everybody. But we want to make sure that you are all clear on what are the steps to take if something should happen. And to present that information today, we've got Sandra Denisak from McGriff Insurance Services. So Sandra, if you'll take a moment and introduce yourself, please.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I'm excited to be part of the panel today and just to give valuable information to the exposures that companies are facing right now, especially with the current pandemic and how those things are increasing. I have been in the insurance world, I think, before I was born. It's probably about 35 years now, and our practice within McGriff focuses on a specialization of coverages that require manuscripting in the policy forms, and specifically in cyber insurance, there are no two insurance policies alike. So it excites us to stay ahead of what those exposures are and crafting policies to the unique needs of each individual client. So excited to talk about this subject today, and pleased to be a part of the panel.
Awesome. We really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with our attendees today. Thank you so much. And next, I'd like to ask Micah Matroka to introduce himself. Micah's with Forum Infotech, and he's going to be covering today different precautions that you can take and the impact of a cyber event. Micah?
Hi, thanks for having me. So a little breakdown of some of the experience that I have. I've got a little over 10 years of professional experience in the IT field, so I'm here to bring that kind of technical aspect, break it down, make it a little more palatable. I am Security Plus certified, which is a DoD rec for some of the higher end security and response procedures, and just glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Micah. So how we formatted today's presentation is really more around a discussion, and we want that to involve you. So if you have a question that comes up that's relevant to the information being presented, please don't hesitate to ask it. We don't want you to wait till the very end and address it there. So pop those into the question box and we will cover them. So as I said earlier, we talk a lot about avoidance. You know, how do we prepare? How do we set up our systems so that we are as protected as we possibly can be? And you know, a few of the most popular types of attacks are listed here on the slide: phishing attacks, social engineering, things when they hit the dark web. But the focus today isn't going to be as much on the type of attacks as it is on preventative maintenance and risk mitigation. So we're going to cover the precautions and liability, the impact of a cyber event, risk mitigation, incident and breach response in that order. So throughout the presentation, we'll share different stories. We will, like I said, cautionary tales, because I think experience is the most educational. So if we can share those experiences that will help you to avoid something of this nature in the future, we are doing our job. So all of this with the goal for you and your business to reduce your overall liability in the world of cybersecurity, because we are becoming more heavily targeted every single day, and we want to make sure that you are doing everything you can to mitigate your risk. All right, so Micah, if you'll cover for us, what are some of the precautions? If we have a discussion around this.
So yeah, sure. So kind of to bring up in the realm of risk mitigation, risk assessment, who has that liability. Honestly, the liability starts with you. It starts with the business. It starts with the people that have the data, have the information that those bad guys really want. So of course, starting off, we want to have some precautions. Some of the questions we have listed here are what you would hopefully be asking yourself. So what are your current policies? Do you have policies in order to take on that risk and that liability? What are you training your end users? So, or how are you training your end users? Are you training your end users? Does that cover certain things? Are you maybe leaving yourself a little vulnerable? Do you have a business continuity plan? So what is a continuity plan? A business continuity plan is something that when a disaster happens, now you flip a switch and you're still running. Operations are key. Being able to manage that and keep on going in business, very important. And then lastly, what is your stance on cybersecurity? Are you a small business and you think, well, I'm a small business, nobody's really interested with me? Well, you'd be wrong, and that's the wrong stance to have. On the other hand, if you're a large business, you probably have a more structured stance because you know you're a bigger target. You have a little more liability, a little more risk on you. So taking into account, what is your stance? It's very important questions to have.
So why is it wrong, Micah? Why is that the wrong mindset if we're a small business?
So
Smaller business.
actually, this is a good topic because I get this question a lot, especially when we're doing training. Almost every time somebody will step up and be like, well, do we actually need to go through all this training? Do we need to have the mindset of being on the defensive? Because maybe we're a small firm, maybe we're we're an industrial firm or manufacturing or something. People don't think a box store that maybe they're a boutique, they have vulnerability. Well, the aggressors out there, the hackers and dark parties, they realize that sometimes it's easier to get in when you don't have that stance. So it's the low-hanging fruit kind of mentality. Would you rather go for the really, really large, really hardened target, or maybe, go after somebody that's easy pickings? So if you make yourself an easy target, more than likely you're going to be an easy target.
Gotcha. And Sandra, any comments from you before we move on?
Right. So, what we're seeing in this environment is an increase in malware and ransomware claims and social engineering. I mean, we can cite the larger organizations of the world, like the Target, Equifax breaches, Marriott, Home Depot, Capital One, Neiman Marcus, and I have small to medium-sized businesses saying, well, we would not potentially reach those type of claims. But the point that I'd like to make is that if they have penetrated these systems that have robust IT departments, certainly they're going to be looking for that easy access to the small and medium-sized business. And those companies we find most vulnerable because they've not taken those steps of precaution. And the best way, our mantra in a risk management, risk avoidance environment, the best way to avoid the claim is to avoid the risk. And so those steps that you take in the very beginning to position will ultimately impact the avoidance of that claim or greatly reduce that. Because even though we have insurance, there are costs that aren't trackable or recoverable. So the impact necessarily is not making you whole by the insurance product. So the first recommendation that we have is, what are we going to do to avoid that claim? And these steps that Micah is speaking with, in a number of carriers with the product that you invest in, they're going to have an e-risk hub. And you'll engage that e-risk hub well before any possible claim. They're going to provide you some of this loss control. They'll give e-learning to your employees. They'll help you with the IP blocking, vulnerability scans. They'll give an orientation. They'll help give you benchmarking to see, what will this really cost us? Endpoint detection response. They'll give you an outside look at what the security ratings are, maybe from a BIT site. They'll give you legal risk and PR consulting to posture for not the what if, but just posture for the when. Because the what if, we think, is by the wayside. It's just when this is going to happen for you, and a claims hotline. So these things that you can do to avoid are critical.
Awesome.
In this environment.
Thank you. So posturing for the when, that's a great segue into our next slide. So, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and when it does happen, what's the impact of that to your business? Micah?
So yeah, that's almost perfect. That's the perfect summation. It's not if it's going to happen, it's when. It's just a matter of when. If you take that stance, then you're going to be more prepared for this, which is when it actually happens. Hopefully you have a disaster response plan. You have a plan out there. Sometimes, that involves just calling your IT person. Sometimes that involves making a phone call to somebody on Sandra's team. What do we do? On the other side, there's companies out there that have booklets that list, if this happened, then this. If this happened, then this. You got to find a correct blend for your business to make it realistic. Obviously, we would love it if everybody had a big thick book, but the reality is sometimes you're too busy running your business, so you have to have those resources, those partners that can help you through it. Did the business continuity plan work? It's the worst feeling when you go and you're like, well, we've now all of our data has been encrypted and we can't get to it. Well, we have a backup, and it's the worst feeling when you go to that backup and you flip the switch and it doesn't work. You realize, well, that backup hasn't been running for 6 months. So now we're 6 months out of date for all of our data. So that's where, being able to have those plans, have those insurances, and, the liability coverage on it is very important. And then obviously, Sandra actually said, there is going to be upfront costs that cannot be calculated. That could be, it's not just monetary calculation. Okay, downtime in your business can actually be monetarily controlled, but now we have to report a breach. We have to let our clients know. What is that going to cost you in how your clients view your company and how you actually work with their information and keep it safe for them?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a,
Reputation management.
yeah, reputation is a big cost when this occurs. So being able to handle that correctly is very important.
I'd
Sure.
like, Micah, for you to go into a little more detail about the plans. As these business owners on the call are thinking about a disaster response plan, business continuity plan, what are the things that they should be including in said plans?
So as different breaches, a lot of these plans are very reactive. Obviously, certain things occur. We don't have 10 years ago, we didn't have the number of vulnerabilities known, at
Mm-hmm.
least, that we do today. So these disaster response plans need to be living, breathing documentation based off of how you actually run your company and what the threats are currently, as well as even possibly into the future. So under those continuity plans, you want to think of the basics that come in is what happens if you're flooded out, what happens if you have a power loss, what happens if you get breached and you lose data, um, all the various different things, and it includes the physical as well as the cyber. It's a very holistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
But the end goal is to be able to get up and running and back to business as fast as possible.
So how often should these plans be tested then?
Um, I I mean, there's no real right answer to that. They need to be tested. The more crucial they are, the more often. Some things, thankfully, technology is catching up where you have some things that are automatically testing now, and you go and it'll let you know when it fails. Some things you need to come together quarterly, yearly, um, with your team, kind of reassess the plan, and make changes as necessary. This is going to have to, like I said, a very living, breathing document.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Sandra, any comments from you?
There are ways to quantify some of what an incident or a breach is going to cost you. And again, that's well and good, and we can get to a certain point that it will just inform and raise the eyebrows of risk avoiding or transferring that risk to a cyber product. But I would say that a great amount of time should be done in this loss control arena. What are those plans? How are you going to respond to that? And it's somewhat of doing that drill before it happens. And the more effort and the more tools that you use to put those into effect will mitigate that end risk and that dollar amount. So, if there's insurance that covers the PR aspect of this, ultimately, do we really know what the impact of that is? It may take years to see what the financial impact is to your reputation. So in all of this, stressing the point that upfront plan be put into place, be rehearsed, be revamped, and exercised is critical to the continuation of your business. The more you have a mindset to that, the more prepared you are in reducing your total liability.
Can either of you share a story where you saw this play out, where this worked or where it didn't work in a real life scenario?
No, I actually have a perfect example of where this all goes wrong. So
I thought you might.
I've got
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot. Unfortunately, I've got a lot
A
more of
lot of
those
those.
than the other. Hopefully things trend the other direction eventually. But so yeah, there's the one that really sticks with me is a client a couple years back where they had the basics down, They had a lot of that prep work. They actually had disaster response plan and continuity plans even, but they failed in that checkup. And just because they had it in place doesn't mean it's right. And the example is this client that we had. They in peak time, they're a printing company, so they had a lot of images, a lot of data that they relied on to keep manufacturing, and they got breached because of lack of training, and all of their data got cryptoed. It all got encrypted up, and they couldn't work. Well, they hadn't reassessed. So this is why that second one is, did the business continuity plan come in? They hadn't reassessed the plan. So they were actually down for 5 days because the backup solution that they had was not correct. And it took that long. Well, 5 days later, they're back up and running. Well, the initial issue wasn't corrected. They got re-encrypted. This happened, they were encrypted no less than 3 times in a single month. Well, now they'd lost an entire month's worth of revenue of production
Wow.
because they didn't follow up. They didn't do the correct procedures to make sure that the solutions that they had, sure, they had solutions, but they weren't necessarily correct for where they had grown into.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing. Sandra, do you have anything, a story you can
Sure.
share?
We're going to find that most of our clients in terms of size range from small, to the Fortune 500s. And so those larger companies that have those robust IT teams are probably more positioned to handle these events. And unfortunately, it's sort of a baptism of fire after the potential incident has been uncovered, and we're being reactive. And while we would have placed proper coverage in place to respond for breach response, for forensics, to engage an attorney for potential legal, the regulatory fines, that's well and good, but the cost impact probably could have been reduced had they done a trial run of what the continuity plan would have been and how would they respond. Insurance is great, but I can't stress enough that it's probably years later that you see the tangible impact to your reputation and the loss after such an event.
Definitely. And that could be loss of clients. That could be, customer revenue loss, not just the downtime from one particular event, or the downtime, I should say, that particular event caused. So good. No, thank you both for sharing. We just had a question come in. How do I manage cyber risks coming from vendors and third parties with a small budget? Micah?
Wow, that's a loaded question. The reality is you can't. You can mitigate it by making it so that the risk from vendors, you separate where your information is away from theirs. You have to be very watchful of what you're bringing in, making sure you're doing due diligence. It's like today we're wearing masks because we don't want to spread around our cooties during the COVID-19. So the same thing happens with our data. We're in a very interlocked digital society now, where files are coming and going. We have these very strategic partnerships with vendors and our clients. So the due diligence is what we can do to protect ourselves, as well as making sure that the other individuals are liable for doing the same. That's really what it comes down to, how you do that obviously is going to be an ever-changing, very, very intricate scenario with how you actually integrate with your vendors and your clients and what your data needs are.
Additional comments, Sandra, if you have one?
You know what? I think that's probably a good entree to the next, because I can speak to that.
I agree.
We can do some planning, we can do some loss control, but in working with your broker to do a proper placement, we want to address that exposure that we have from third parties, so whether it's a reliance upon their systems, we have a cloud utilization, but if we're impacted by other third-party systems, that should be something that we want to address and cover within a cyber liability product. So if we, you know, most people say, well, why do I need this kind of coverage? Interestingly enough, some of these claims that will come up for malware, ransomware, social engineering, they may penetrate into other areas of insurance that you carry, crime insurance, management liability, but really the forefront of that protection is going to be sought in a cyber product. So what does that mean? What are the costs that you face in an incident or a potential breach? You're going to need some forensic analysis. You will face some regulatory penalties and fines. You will potentially be faced with a ransom payment, some legal expenses to defend you because of a breach of private or corporate information. You're going to have some PR expenses and some communications that need to be thoughtfully determined with others that can give you guidance to reduce the harm to the reputation in your marketplace. There's going to be some credit monitoring that occurs with that. There's going to be business interruption. So we're looking at two things. There's first-party costs and third-party costs. And part of that exposure that you have, an inability to access your system or reach information for that which you rely upon from a third-party vendor, the impact of that and the business interruption that you have with that should be covered by an properly placed cyber policy. I'm going to switch. I think, Nicole, if you can go to the next slide. Then, are there any questions on that? Or anything that you can add to that, Micah?
No, I mean, that's great information. It basically gives a really large picture of what's actually going to happen, what's going on in the background, which even from my point of view on the technical side, I don't often get that large, picture of what the actual impact is and how big it is for when a breach does occur.
Right.
So moving on, I think we already kind of segued into this, the incident and breach response. So now that this is happening, what is that disaster plan and what is going to kick in? What are we going to do? The cleanup, the analysis. So you talked about forensics, and that's discovering the actual extent of the disaster within that analysis, and then planning accordingly, seeing what your liability is. What does the insurance company need for your successful claim example? Which, Sandra, you can easily, give us some information on there.
Sure. So, we talked about this before. What's the steps of avoidance, and then when it happens, what do we do? And I've had calls a week to 2 weeks later where there's been a suspected breach or an incident, and IT's been in there trying to plug and protect, and they're letting me know it could be a week, 2 weeks, a month later, which is the absolute worst thing to do. So the first thing that happens is that there are reporting provisions within the policy, and they're going to be different with each carrier. For instance, one of our major carriers, we're just recently seeing policies that are being presented where they're saying, if we have a social engineering claim, you must report this within 24 hours. So if we're not meeting the reporting requirements, then we potentially look at a claim that's going to be denied. So the way that we need to think about this is, we're going to engage that e-risk hub that I spoke to you about in terms of doing that pre-planning, the contingency plan, how are you going to respond? But then that broker is also going to be letting you know, these are the timeframes that you need to make a report. And being well aware of what those parameters are before a suspected incident ever occurs. So it's critical in engaging the broker and the carrier as early as you can. A lot of these policies for a small to medium-sized business, they've already vetted, and they require that you use their breach vendors, that you use their panel counsel for privacy breaches and allegations, and they're engaging with the brightest and the best within the industry. So, your breach vendors are going to be people like Kroll or CrowdStrike, Mandiant, Kivu. So they've already have that team to assist you in this response. But we have other companies that are larger, and they're saying, well, I just want an approval to use a particular vendor. I want to use my attorney. I don't really need to have you step in from the onset. So you have agreed upon vendors and panel counsel that you can go to. But I think most of the audience that we're speaking to today is going to be in that area where you will be using that approved panel counsel and vendor list. And with that, so what do we do? The carrier isn't necessarily going to jump in and say, well, we're approving this claim and we're going to pay, not to worry, we're going to pay it from this day forward. So they're going to need to gather a little bit of information. If you are using some outside counsel, there may be some privileged information. So we want to make sure that we know, at least initially, what's going on, some of those specifics, because we want to guide you and how you report this incident to the carriers. We need to consider if there are some privilege issues at the very onset. So we may just be guiding you and saying, just make very little information known to the carrier, so we're meeting the reporting guidelines until we can dig in more thoroughly. And the carrier will say, well, we want to engage the breach vendor right now, and here is the panel counsel that you have utilized, and we approve this particular attorney. Well, the privacy attorney then will engage and circle with the breach vendors for the next steps. Sometimes we'll recommend to go ahead and use the 1-800 number, but we caution a client to just give the most basic facts, because we want to make sure that we're protecting privileges. So in that process, they're going to immediately engage and approve forensics. So do we really know if we've had a breach? Is it a breach or is it an incident? So it takes some time to reach that point. So the biggest recommendation today is you speak with the broker and the carrier early, at the very hint of a potential incident, and let them guide you through that process so that your coverage is protected and responds the way that you want it to respond.
So if I can kind of chime in, is what you're discussing, what you're telling us is that the carrier, the broker, is really just needs to be a real partnership with the company, with the IT infrastructure. And the louder and faster you can ring the bell, the better off that partnership's going to progress and create solutions in regards to possible claims, possible liability issues.
Right. So we want to protect and make sure that that well-placed coverage that you have triggers to afford those things that you're expecting. You're expecting some help with the expenses for the forensics. You want to be defended. You want a PR firm helping walk you through. At which point do we determine it's a breach? How do we notice those individuals or entities that their information's been breached? When do we make those reports to the regulators? So all of that requires a village, we call it, to take you through that process. And you need, these policies are rich in coverage. They should be. A well-placed policy will respond and partner with you to bring you to a place of wholeness. And but the reporting is critical. And these carriers there are no two policies alike that we place. The trigger of coverage with carrier A is going to be different than B and C. So the reporting notification guidelines are going to have a wide variance, and you need to know what those are. And the broker needs to be guiding you through that process to make sure you're meeting those parameters and that the claim gets paid, bottom line. So
are you looking for part of your claim, or are you taking, is it important to have things like a police report and things of that nature?
Well, again, if ultimately it reveals itself that it's gone to a breach, there's going to be steps in that process at which time that you make reports to regulators. So that should be led and guided by panel counsel, the breach vendors. At that point in time when other parties need to be notified, then they will lead you in that process. That's not something that you really need to be concerned about from the onset.
Okay,
In a
gotcha.
social engineering claim, where you've been duped and the employee believes the phishing email, and they parted with some of your money or your property, and so the adjuster at that point from the carrier may say, okay, we need to make a police report now. But each claim scenario is different in terms of incident or breach, or if it's a social engineering claim. Each of those will have different guidelines. And again, the carrier should be leading you through that process.
Okay, good. So what I really want to drill down in this, I'm going to just summarize here, because I want to make sure we're all clear on the process, because I know this was important for me, and I want to make sure it's clear, that it's clear to our attendees as well. So to summarize, your first step is going to be to follow your reporting provisions that are in your policy. So kind of, I think, sums up as report it as soon as it happens, don't wait. So because
Exactly.
you could have, it could be 24 hours. That you have to report it. So as soon as it happens, as soon as you're made aware of it, get it reported to your agent, to your broker carrier, and then they'll do the assignment of the they'll engage the attorney. Identified privilege information would be step number 2 as part of their information gathering, and how they're going to route the direction that they route the claim. Is that correct for step number 2?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then as part of that, they identify the incident type. Is it a breach? Is it an incident? And then from there, that determines the regulators that you mentioned, which would be the police, the bank, I would imagine would be part of that.
Right, the FBI. Yeah, it just depends. You'll be guided in those steps.
Okay. Anything that I'm missing there in that summary?
No. Nope.
So
That is good information.
About how long does it take then from start to finish? Which I understand every claim is different, so this might be a loaded question, but what would be like an average you would say that it takes when these
Oh, it really
incidents
depends on what the allegation is. Is it an incident? Is it a breach? Is it a social engineering claim? If it's a breach, well, the time, there's no timeline to what the determination is through the forensics process to reveal that. So each scenario is just going to be different. You know, I've had, it depends upon the extent of the breach.
Okay.
Depends on the extent of the breach. We need to be having that determination and getting our arms around that and having forensics reveal that sooner than later in line with regulatory requirements. So in a social engineering claim, I'm usually seeing it resolved quicker. I need for the carrier to be responding. They have a 30-day period to exercise whether or not, with a reservation of rights, whether or not they're going to honor the claim and provide defense. So we are engaging them and pushing them as early as possible to give us a coverage determination. And often they want to mitigate that claim also. They want to make sure that they're protecting those amount of dollars that need to go out. So the time frame is wide. It just really depends on the specifics of the incident.
Sure. So I'm curious too in the information gathering. So what type of information would the business be responsible for reporting? And maybe it's throughout the entire process. What type of information would the response team be looking for?
Well, we would start. Well, how do you know that you have an incident or a breach? What are those specifics? Why do you think that this has occurred? And that's where we would start. Mm-hmm. And you know, have hopefully the IT department hasn't spent an inordinate amount of time on that protect and plug. Because we and the carrier need to participate in that process. So with that basic information, then those forensic vendors will further that process.
Okay,
so
great.
It's really just basic information to begin with. You really do not need to shoulder as much as you think. I find you know, my IT world is that they're in there to fix. They're in there to plug it and protect. You really need to be calling us sooner than later so that we can be those shoulders to help you through that process.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, that's good information. Thank you, Sandra, for sharing. We did have a question come in on this topic. So from a business perspective, is there a checklist or certain steps that you should take immediately once you're breached? So obviously call your insurance carrier right away. We've covered that. Anything, engage your IT company, of course. So would there be anything to add to that checklist that businesses should consider right away?
Micah, do you want to respond to that? Or?
Oh, I mean, that's actually, it's really good information that we hear that the carriers, the providers are coming together to assist, because you know, back in the day, it was your IT provider was the one that was responding. So of course, you know, the checklist is long, and it depends on the incident or breach, and very dependent on what actually happened. A social engineering attack is going to have a different response than a you know, a physical break-in or a you know, a malware attack or something like that. So the checklist really starts off with, engaging with the carrier, engaging with the your IT, if that's in-house or if you have a third-party provider, and leveraging those resources in a partnership to really come to the solution that's best for your company. So from the business perspective, it's again leveraging that partnership. That's the checklist. From our side in the IT realm, it's highly dependent on what the actual incident was. There are standards and procedures, like Sandra said, there certain things need to be reported to the FBI, certain things need to be reported to the banks. The reporting needs actually almost go and create those checklists, more than the fact of just going up and cleaning it up. Because when you have that reporting requirement, now we have forensic needs. We have to track what actually happened, when it happened, the handoff of certain information, to fill out those reports. So that cleanup can't just be plugging the hole and then walking away anymore. And the world has kind of evolved. So, we want to make sure that the insurance is able to cover you. So you have to check all the lists that are required by the insurance. You have to make sure that you're not opening yourself up for additional liability by not reporting correctly.
So if I suspect,
Right. So that, I'm
go ahead,
sorry.
Sandra.
So the checklist will vary depending upon what the incident is. Is it a breach? Is it a social engineering claim? That it will be dependent upon the specifics of what that individual incident presents. And again, the insurance carrier, along with those, it's your support team, the breach vendors, the legal counsel, the PR relations, the notification firms that there are all provided to you, will lead you in that process.
Okay.
They'll help make those determinations.
Okay, fantastic. All right, I think we've covered everything there. We understand the first thing we're going to do is to engage the two companies here. They're going to then the real heavy lifting starts in engaging the breach response team. So Sandra, I know you had wanted to share a little bit about the agency. So we're going to move on to the next slide.
Oh, sure. Just the McGriff is the 5th largest broker in the world, so we have a size and stability. Our cyber team capabilities, because we specialize in this, it's as I said, no two policies are alike. So all of our team members are intimate with manuscript wording, with the bespoke wordings in the policy, staying ahead of what the current claim trends are to make sure that these policies respond the way that you would like them. The question that we have previously is an impact on my system from a vendor, a customer, a third party provider, a cloud provider covered. So that requires appropriate addressing under a policy. It's different than a property policy that's standardized. So you're having a team that's looking at all of these exposures and intimately addressing that under the insurance policy cover. And once we get to the point of a claim, our claim team members are very versed in getting these things paid. That's why we spend an inordinate amount of time coaching the clients well before an incident occurs. And when it occurs, then we have those professionals that can assist us in getting those claims paid. The market clout with the markets and doing the placements and having a response.
I get this question pretty regularly. I just conducted a cybersecurity training, an intro to cybersecurity last night, and they asked, what's an average policy for cyber liability insurance cost? So I know that's probably a question that depends, right, but what's taken into consideration? Is it the size of the company, the revenue, when the policy is being priced?
So the application process is critical. What protections are in place? The carrier is already asking you before they even provide a policy, they have their checklist to see what your culture is in terms of protection of data. So they're looking at the number of records that you hold of private information. They're looking at corporate information that you hold from other parties that could be breached, could be claims of trade secrets. So they're looking at number of records. They're looking at the controls that you already have in place, your best practices and procedures, revenues of the company. And then the pricing is going to vary based upon the deductible and retention and the limits of insurance that you carry. But I can tell you, and it will depend on the industry that you're in. Are you a tech company? Are you a manufacturer? Are you a hospital? Those industries that have a larger exposure for private information, potential of being breached. But the pricing, I would say, in these early years of cyber insurance are very affordable. And as the claims increase, that'll probably adjust in the marketplace. But at this point in time, there's adequate limits out there with minimal extension of premium to cover these risks.
Okay.
So the sooner you get in, the better.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I have companies, I would have companies that are up to 25 or 50 million in premium. They have 75 to 100 employees. Maybe they have 250 to 1,000 PII records, and their pricing is running 5,000 to 8,000 in premium a year.
So you even get down to the personal identifiable information records and how much is being kept. So that's pretty granular for the
right.
That's pretty good.
Mhm.
Right, and they're going to look too at website content because the cyber coverage is plugging the hole that the general liability personal injury excludes now for for website content, publications, breach of intellectual property, copyright infringement. So you have carriers that are looking into your website, seeing what you look like. I hope that answers the question broadly enough.
It did. Thank you. It's one, like I said, it comes up quite a bit. So we've got about 5 to 7 minutes left. So I know, Sandra, you wanted to cover just the different capabilities of the cyber team. I thought this was really good information.
Just to reiterate, before all team members, we have our practice is specialized, staying ahead of the exposures to craft those unique policies. Each policy is unique, depending upon the exposures for that individual risk. The practice is focused on this specifically. Our claim team members are versed in from the initial reporting to the closure of that claim. We are at the forefront in the industry in scripting policy language. And it's over a span of small to large companies that we handle within our network. And I think that sums it up, Nicole.
Fantastic.
Got something for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Micah, if you would give us open the curtain on your closing thoughts, please.
So I actually got a lot of information out of this myself. Thank you, Sandra. The big points that I think kind of hit me was work with your partnerships. Be proactive in making those partnerships. Here at Forum Infotech, we are proactive in the actual IT. We do the dark web monitoring, awareness training, vulnerability assessments, behavior analytics, penetration testing. Those are all big words for some of the products that we provide on a preemptive measures basis. And then you want to be able to partner with obviously a provider like Sandra and her company that takes it to the next level for the liability reasons.
And I'd add to that proactive with the relationship, but also understanding what's actually in your policy. I just got my homeowner's renewal policy and it's like type 6 font size and it's like 28 pages long for just my homeowner's insurance. So did I read it to understand it? Not really, because I don't understand 3/4 of the language. So working with your partner, and make sure that you really understand these things so that you're not missing the reporting deadlines, and creating that checklist that says, okay, if it's a social engineering attack, it's 24 hours. If it's this attack, it's 12 hours. But at the core, let's get it reported right away. So making sure that we really truly understand and we take the time to learn about it, because I know for me personally, that's something I just kind of sign and return and pay it. So Sandra, any closing thoughts and remarks from you?
No, I just, you know, just in this environment, what are we seeing? You know, I'm looking at Kivu's report in the past 6 months that they published in May, and we're looking at the extent of the malware and the ransomware claims of dox victims. But of course, that public shaming page is really out there for those who have refused to capitulate. So if those are the ones that are being shamed, what others out there have paid that ransom? So really, this loss control, this risk avoidance, is critical in this environment because we don't know what the end is. It's a work at home, infinite work at home for a good number of industries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good time to be shoring that up. Most of the mistakes that we're having in social engineering is because of employer error and the phishing and clicking on things. And with social engineering, there's not a large amount of insurance that's available for that. You're limited to anywhere from 100 to 250,000. So risk avoidance is critical because those limits of insurance for social engineering are, you know, we can get 1, 5, 10 million limits for privacy breach, but in terms of you're voluntarily parting with your money or your property, that is the maximum amount that's going to be paid in the industry right now.
Okay, that's good information.
So just be aware of what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to that, that preemptive stance of thinking on if or like is wrong, but when is correct. So when is it going to happen?
Awesome. Thank you both for your closing thoughts. We did have one question come in from Sophia, and she just wants to confirm anti-software isn't enough to protect small businesses.
So yeah, I'll hit that really quick. I'm gonna think it's the antivirus software and stuff like that. Yeah. Short answer, no. long answer is that only protects, you know, that little portion, that little sliver of the full attack surface. And even then, sometimes that software isn't doing the best it could. So that's where, you know, reaching out, getting a partner like Forum Infotech and having that experience to leverage is really important to answer those questions.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate both of you participating in this webinar today. And for our participants, we really appreciate your time. And we've got our contact information there on the screen. So if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. The recording for this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. The link there is on the screen. So until next time, thanks again, everybody, for your participation, and we hope that you got some valuable nuggets of information today. Have a wonderful rest of the day.